Hey there, it's time for the show, the Tatiana Show, where you make friends and talk life and crypto. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tatiana Show. Today, we're going to be talking with Colin Cantrell, the founder of the Nexus project. We've known for quite a few years now. We go back to this cool Aspen event that him and his amazing team threw. But before I introduce him, I must, of course, welcome to the show my handsome and debonair co-host, Josh Tagala. Hey, buddy, how you doing?
Tatiana, once again, I'm doing well. I don't know. Every week I'm doing well, but I try to stay above the fold when it comes to doing well. We just
Wait.
launched negative trading fees, so that's
That's
really
what I was going to
exciting.
ask you about, because there's all this action right now with gold. You've got your Voltoro hat.
Yeah,
What's the story? Just before we bring Colin on, you want to give us a little scoop? Should people be buying
yeah.
gold or Bitcoin?
No. I mean, it's all about diversification. So a lot of Bitcoiners, they just slowly diversify into gold as it's going up, and then out of gold as it's going down, and that's the key. I mean, I usually do it the other way around, but but no, the plan is to do that, and because of negative trading fees, it'll hopefully make people want to trade more because they get paid instead of paying a fee. So that's really fun, and it's exciting launching some stuff. Developing an exchange, you have to be very, very precise. Things just don't happen quickly. You have to test everything.
Let me ask you something. Can somebody even buy Bitcoin online without doing KYC? Right now, in a regular, like if a regular person wanted to set up their bank account, you have to do KYC. I don't think you can even buy Bitcoin
I
without
mean,
it,
you could buy
unless
Bitcoin.
from a person.
Yeah, good old school style. Meet them in the street at Starbucks. By the way, tip of the day, folks: if you're going to meet people in the street to buy Bitcoin, definitely meet them like in a bank. Just use them for their cameras. Use them in the lobby and just do your trade, and then get out. Don't do it in some weird dodgy back alley.
Okay, that's pretty good. Are people still using local Bitcoins for that? What's the deal there?
Yeah, I think so. There's also a really great app, Mycelium. It's one of the oldest wallets as well. They've got a local marketplace, so you can find
Oh,
local traders near you, and it's totally without KYC as well. It's really cool.
whoa, that's
Yeah.
the ticket right there.
Just ask me.
Oh.
Stick with me, kid.
Thanks. I will. You've always been such a good friend to me. I was saying the other day that I know this sounds cheesy, but I get to be friends with a lot of really smart people and just amazing people in their own way, and it's just very, very good to be in crypto,
I hear a
especially
segue. Is this a segue?
especially on a day that the price is pumping. So one of the fun people I've met along my journey is Colin Cantrell. So Colin, you are now officially part of the show. Welcome. You come in
Thank you
like the
for
man
having
from
me.
the light. So everybody look at Colin's background. Okay. If you're watching, you can tell. If you're not, well, sorry, but his background is so beautiful. I have a photo of the Bahamas behind me. He actually has this tropical looking environment and it's a real place. So that was really cool earlier today.
Yeah, I lucked out. I mean, it's in Phoenix, so it's kind of counterintuitive, right? It's the desert, but yeah, lucked out. Got a couple ice cubes under my computer, so hopefully I don't overheat. So it comes with its downsides too.
Doesn't that make it wet on the computer bottom? Isn't that
No, I
against
got
the
those.
plan?
No, got those ice packs that you put that are sealed up. So I keep those in my freezer, and then I put it right on here to keep it because, yeah, it's too hot
Wow,
nowadays. I mean, I go
smart
outside
living.
for even 5-10 minutes, and it just starts locking up. So, yeah, it's that time of year. We're waiting for the
Absolutely.
rain and dealing with the heat. Yeah,
Well, we were just talking about the Jackalope Festival. So you're
yeah,
definitely going to go. I know Lynn Ulbricht, she just
absolutely.
did a
Yeah,
show with us recently. She's going to be there. It's the first time that I would be going if I go. There could be a slight chance that it'll happen. And you've definitely improved my chances of happening by
yeah.
luring me in with tales of fun and cello
Yeah, well,
duets.
make sure to let me know before if you're coming for sure, so I can make sure to bring my cello. I mean, I'll just pack it in my truck and whatever. It's no big deal.
That sounds good. Well, we'll have to work
Yeah,
out those details. If people are listening and
yeah,
they're thinking, where are these weirdos going? Check out the Jackalope Festival. Just type it into your DuckDuckGo or whatever, and you can look it up. So Colin, you are a musician and a very creative person, but you're also the creator of a tech project called Nexus.
Yep.
Explain to me what Nexus is if I was, a 5-year-old. For some of our listeners, they're not familiar with it. And even for some
Yeah.
seasoned crypto veterans, it's a little bit hard. So walk us through it.
Yeah, well, the definition of Nexus is a connection or series of connections linking two or more things, right? So Nexus, in the very basic level, it's kind of considered a new internet protocol. So, in 1996, if you said, what is the internet? That's basically the best way that we've been able to describe what is Nexus. And a lot of this came from just studying the internet and the current internet infrastructure, understanding some of the security pitfalls associated with it. I mean, that's one reason that we have hacking, everywhere, because the internet, it was kind of like Bitcoin. It was kind of a prototype. It was run mainly for, military government, not Bitcoin, obviously, but, they both came as prototypes, right? And then they grew just extremely quickly. And it's always been playing catch up on the tech ever since then. If, like on your computer, you only have 4.3 billion IP addresses with IP version 4. But there's way more devices, right? So that's one symptom of it. They've been trying to upgrade the entire internet to IP version 6 for about 20 years, but it still hasn't been upgraded because it's
why?
just a victim of its own success. Because every router has to be actually physically updated, and you have to update to a new router and a new actual software associated with it. So they're just not everybody's updated. People are still running their old routers and everything. So you have this kind of like disincentive to upgrade. And, the internet doesn't really have any incentive mechanisms either. Like if, AT&T and Comcast, let's say, right? Let's say you send a packet, I'm sending a packet to you. And I'm on Comcast and I have to pass through AT&T's network, right? Because every ISP doesn't have the entire global internet. The AT&T network is going to have to forward that packet for me, right? Now, they don't necessarily always forward every single packet, but there's this kind of unwritten law. Okay, I'll forward for you, you forward for me. And that's what makes the internet run, is it's just this kind of mutually assured destruction in a way. The game theory of the internet is really broken because it wasn't really implemented into the system. So Nexus is kind of taking these incentives in game theory and applying that into an internet model that goes all the way down to the hardware, right? Which includes mesh networks and satellites, right? Because as we're seeing more and more, apparently, the internet is becoming less and less valuable because it's being censored so significantly. And, this has been a problem that we've foreseen for a long time. And that's, where a lot of Nexus was kind of born in just realizing, the economic systems need to be redone. And then, diving more into the internet technology, I started realizing, well, the internet stack needs to be rebuilt too, right? So Nexus is kind of the embodiment of observing all of these problems in the world and creating solutions for it.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Josh. Take it away.
No, that's amazing. So there's been a few projects that have tried to like tackle the big picture, like Made Safe and stuff like that. Is this kind of trying it as well, just to build a new internet? Is that where you're going?
Yes and no. I mean, in a sense. So, okay, I build software, right? I develop open source software. Nexus is an open source software client, peer-to-peer client, right? But the blockchain I don't build, right? Because miners have an incentive to build the blockchain, right? The blockchain builds itself because there's game theory implemented to that. So what we're doing is we're taking those same type of concepts that we can do through blockchain tokenomics and applying that game theory into the actual hardware distribution. Because right now, internet only has about 2 billion users, I think, and there's 8 billion people in the world, right? There's a lot of people that are disconnected. Now, Elon Musk with Starlink is attempting to bridge that, but he's still doing it through the conventional ISP model. So what this is doing is it's creating that gamification, but the other result from that gamification that comes in too is it gives access to the everyday person. And it also gives, what I mean by access is it gives them the capability to monetize and earn ROI, and just as a regular individual rather than a giant corporation. Because as the internet works, you have to be a big corporation to make any meaningful impact in it, right? They're throwing money left and right because there's so much out there. And so when you apply this kind of blockchain economic system into it, this protocol will build itself, right? So we're developing the open source hardware and open source operating system that's going to run on IoT devices, and hopefully bring Linux, I guess, to people a lot more. It's going to be Unix based, so it'll have some components of Linux, but make it extremely user friendly. And also it's kind of like, I mean, building a new internet, I guess so, but we're not the ones that's doing it, right? It's supposed to be, I guess, the next augmented step in the internet's evolution, by creating a greater sense of decentralization, right? Like I use Bitcoin as an example to compare it to, right? Bitcoin was designed to be decentralized, right? But it's not. It's run by oligarchs, right? You have, 7 mining pools in China, and then, Blockstream, and that's it, right? I mean,
I still like Bitcoin, for the record. Please send it. Feel free.
Yeah, and by all means, I'm not talking bad about Bitcoin, and just making observations from what I've seen. And the code, it was designed with Moore's law being the scaling solution, right? Moore's law is that every number of years, the number of transistors doubles, which means computing power always gets faster and faster, right? But they're starting to find that's not true forever, right? I mean, processors, if you've noticed, they're not getting faster, they're just adding more cores, right? Because they're running into actual limits. Like some of the limits actually come from what's called quantum tunneling, where if you have a barrier, an electron's right here, but then quantum tunneling happens, and all of a sudden, oh no, it just decides it's over here, right? Because on the quantum level, it circumvents the space-time continuum, right? So are so small, so computing power is running more limited. And so that idea of the scaling Bitcoin through Moore's law just has proven incorrect, right? Now, the internet was designed to be decentralized too. It created organizations like the IEEE and the IETF in order to do standardization process and have working groups, but even that is oligarchical too, right? It's usually a big company that's running the IETF, every few years, and they donate and yada, 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 right? So all of these intentions of the internet and the intentions of Bitcoin, I don't think have been fully realized because of lack of technical capabilities, right? Because you just can't foresee everything in your first prototype, right? I mean, and that's why we kind of come in where we're Nexus, we're sitting over here and we're observing all of these things. We're observing all these people, we're observing Bitcoin, we're observing Ethereum, and we're letting them make a lot of the mistakes that we don't have to, right? And so in kind of a reference, like the internet and Bitcoin, I kind of combine, I see them synonymously together, and they're kind of like the vacuum tube is, right? Which that's just a switch. Just think about it as it's a big switch, right? But it's a really high speed switch. And that's actually the predecessor to the transistor, right? The transistor is another high speed switch, but it's really small. And that's what makes computers work. So back in the day, the reason computers took up an entire room, they were so gigantic, is because they had all these vacuum tubes in order to do the logic gates, and vacuum tubes were very large instruments. So, Bitcoin and the internet are kind of like this vacuum tube, right? It's the proof of concept. It shows you how to do computation. It works. It does the basics, right? It teaches us a lot of things, but Nexus is the transistor, right? Which really made the computer small enough to fit in everybody's pocket, made it cheap enough, right? And that's part of where technology is really important, especially in this industry, is lowering that barrier to entry, right? You can utilize technology to actually simplify the experience rather than add complexities. Right now, I observe a lot of the industry is kind of overcomplicating the experience, and it's really geeky, even with having a wallet.dat file, right? Dealing with encryption, managing your keys. I think the last study I saw, 20% of all Bitcoins have been lost. 20%. 20% of all Bitcoin addresses have had a lost private key, right? It's just regular users aren't going to be able to use that, right? And so that's one shortcoming that we see with Bitcoin and the internet, right? Like, nothing's authenticated, right? I can just totally pretend to be you, and the internet will just do it, right? Routing tables, right? Which, think of a routing table as like a tree. An IP address is kind of like a machine readable geolocation, right? So that, you say, oh, I need to go, to that IP address. Okay, well, that's in Europe, and it's going to go and it's going to hop and then move that way. These run inside these routers, have these big tables, say, okay, this goes there and that goes there and this goes there. And there's all this state that needs to be managed that can be manipulated with BGP. Somebody can actually go in and hack. If you've ever seen the internet go down, like large portions of the internet go down, I think over the last few years, we've seen a few instances of that. That's due to just BGP routing attacks. You just attack the routing table and boom, it's gone, right? Because the internet is just, hey, anything goes, right? You just, whatever, it's just all going to go through the wire. And that's created a lot of problems.
Let's unpack that. There's a lot to unpack there, and
Yeah.
what I'm really interested in is how does the blockchain that Nexus generate help any of that? And also,
Yeah.
so are you running the DNS through there, its own DNS systems? Is that kind of like .eth, but there'll be .nex or something like that, or
No, I mean,
old school
it's
internet?
yeah. I mean, as far as the .eth and .next and whatever, all that stuff, like we're not really necessarily integrating the domain system through ICANN. Like we have a naming system built into the network called the Tau name system. And so it's kind of, we're less coupling with the current internet infrastructure and building new internet infrastructure. So one of the ways that we help, right? You doing authentication on every level. So with Nexus OS, right, it's going to have an embedded signature chain, which is kind of like our Nexus account model, that essentially has authentication for each device, right? And that's going to go in and, do address resolution packets for one, which is a mapping between your MAC address and your local IP address. Those can be poisoned, right? If you've ever heard, don't go log into your bank account on a public Wi-Fi, that's why, because ARP messages can be spoofed. So a hacker can just go on there and say, oh, hey, I'm Google over here. And, you're going to send packets to them, and then the mailman will attack you, right?
Wait, time out. Are people really doing that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All
Really?
the time, 24/7.
I heard my crypto friends talk about this, and I just can't imagine people doing that. I mean, maybe stealing Bitcoin at a conference, but if I'm just at the airport, you think people are really just stealing credit cards there?
Oh yeah.
Really?
And I mean, even worse than just that, like, I mean, you get into the security vulnerabilities of a credit card, right? That little mag strip, which is like ancient technology since like the 40s or 50s, can be read at a distance, right? So I can just get a little credit card reader that's a little extra sensitive and walk by you and steal your credit card info, right? Because it's all encoded on that mag strip, right? That's why if you
easy to be a thief.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of it's because the technology has enabled that. We have this, and same with Bitcoin, right? It's just this new technology that blows up and everybody uses it because it's so valuable. But because it blew up, they're always technically playing catch up, right? BGP, which is the routing system used on the internet, is known to be very flawed, but we still use it. They've had 2 other propositions of the ITF to replace it, but nothing's really taken form.
It's the power of the
IP
network
version
effect.
4, right? It will not function at 4.3 billion addresses. There's way more devices than that, but the internet still uses it. Why? Because nobody's gonna upgrade everything, right? It's just like Bitcoin, right? They have to soft fork because nobody will want to upgrade because there's no incentives built into it, right? So it's just created this huge incubation chamber for thieves, like crypto, right? For scammers and thieves and hacking and all that stuff, right? I can pretend to be you and masquerade as you, Tatiana, just by sourcing packets from your IP address, and all the packets are going to go back to you, right? There's no way to verify you are the actual person that sent that, right? By the way the current internet architecture works. So with Nexus, that's where you get the Nexus OS is originally being designed for IoT and Cube satellites, but it's also a blockchain-powered operating system. So we're going to actually use the ledger as an additional layer of abstraction to secure your entire operating system. Because think of it like a virus. Your computer is kind of like this big gooey blob. Just think of it as like a gooey blob, right? And anything you inject into it, it's just going to grow it and spit it out, right? Just like a cell. Like you inject RNA into a cell, it creates more of that virus, and boom, you have a viral infection in your body. So with a computer, these viruses inject their code, right? Which is, think of it as their runtime code. That's kind of like the virus, right? Into your file system. And then it sits there and it hides inside your file system. Like Windows, that user account control, when you have to click yes for everything, right? Yes, it's okay to open this, blah, 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 right? All you have to do to bypass that is inject your virus into explorer.exe. Windows doesn't know the difference. And it starts executing your virus already elevated, right? Because explorer.exe has to be elevated, right? You don't even have to deal with it. There's so many ways to bypass all these things because it's kind of like a game of whack-a-mole, right? When you build something really quickly and then it blows up and then you're playing catch up after that, you never really had the time to assess your foundation, right? What happens when you build a building on sand? It's gonna fall, like Leaning Tower of Pisa, right? Bad foundation, right? So the internet and Bitcoin and all of crypto has just this bad foundation work. And that's what's causing all of these other issues, because, once you think you've, uprooted something, something else sprouts through the crack, right? And
So,
so, yeah,
sorry, Colin, you're on a wonderful rant there, but I do want to really grab at how the normal user uses Nexus. So how do I
yeah.
build a website? Let's say I've got a blog. I don't want to use the normal internet. I want to use Nexus. How do I go about that? Do I fire up my own OS on a normal computer? And can I then, like Nexus OS, and then launch, I don't know, serve a website from that?
Yeah, so there's going to be two prongs to that. I guess I'll explain how it works a little bit before I explain like what the user is necessarily required to do.
Okay.
We're putting the burden of cost on the actual hosting or the services rather than on the actual connectivity, right? So you're not going to have an ISP bill. So generally, you have a mesh network, right? I can have a ground station that connects me to a satellite, or I can just connect to the regular mesh network. So out of box, Nexus OS is just going to connect to the next, the Nexus, right, or the mesh network, right? So you're not going to have to connect to Wi-Fi. You're not going to have to configure anything. That's one thing that we're designing this to be, is just super user friendly. And then there's the ground-based file system, which is going to be called the LLD file system, and that is gamifying the file hosting, right, on the ground anyway. So that I can say, when I start up Nexus OS, oh, you have 100 gigabytes of hard drive space. Do you want to, sell 50 gigabytes of it, or do you want to just sell your free space while you're not using it? You say, sure. You get a little bit of passive income, right? And you end up servicing the data for other people in a type of peer-to-peer contract. I can explain all the dynamics of how that works if you want in a little more detail, because there's a lot of game theory that goes into making that work properly.
Mm-hmm.
And then the satellites act as another data layer, right? But they are a more secure, physically isolated data layer. So if you have data that you want to have persistent, you want it to be geolocatable without the need for mesh networks, and you want to have higher levels of security through that physical isolation, then you're going to be paying a higher premium for hosting your data on the satellite. So the common interface through Nexus OS, we're going to still allow some of the old common interfaces like FTP, file transfer protocol, and stuff like that. But generally, it's just going to be done all through the OS interface. If I have a file that I have hosted on a satellite, it's just going to be a new folder or a new drive, a virtual drive. Oh, this is my satellite drive. Oh, this is my virtual cloud drive. And the idea of Nexus OS 2 is to actually decouple your computer from the hardware, where your computer will start existing more in a virtualized space than the physical space. So your computer will become an instrument to provide computing cycles to that virtual space, whether for you locally or for other people, so that you create this type of large computer network, essentially.
And the redundancies will be running on everybody's computers. So if one,
not every, it's going to be
not
certain,
everybody's computers, but maybe like
yeah,
five,
you're going to have
versions.
redundancy on your file hosting, and you'll end up paying. If let's say you'll be able to do it directly to a peer that you know and have verified as well, or if there's somebody that you've got unverified, then you obviously have to check through the trust. So there's a reputation system built into it too, so that unreputable nodes that aren't delivering the data properly are going to end up losing the reputation, right? And that's part of a really important component of the security model of Nexus, is the trust and reputation system, because that disables new money or old money from buying new time, right? One of the biggest problems of the world is that all the old money that doesn't age is buying all of the new time. But the way you shift that and you eliminate that is you make only new time getting the new money, or new money getting the new time, right? So, in order
that's
to
the
attack,
blockchain incentivizing.
that's part of it. There's a lot of different facets of incentivization, right? So the idea with the satellite network is that, you can either be somebody that hosts data, right? Which means you pay a monthly hosting fee to satellite providers, or you're somebody that actually invests in the satellite, right? So you create investment opportunity for people, whether it's a ground station or a satellite. I could be, somebody in my local neighborhood. I decide, I'm tired of paying that 5 Nexus a month to my neighbor to use his ground station. I'm going to buy my own for $200. And then I can start selling that ground station access to local people around my network. And then the satellite operators can start selling the disk space, right, on their satellites in order to provide more of these hosting solutions. So it is a new internet infrastructure, and there are some components of the old internet architecture that we're using, but I mean, like IP addresses, you're not going to have IP addresses on Nexus. I've actually been developing a stateless routing system. So as I was telling you, the routing tables on every router has to have all of these records to say this goes there, that goes there, blah, blah, blah. And so imagine billions and billions and billions and billions of these records spread out across all this hardware. It's really, really inefficient. And all of that state that has to be managed is really complex. It's a lot of work to manage that state. This routing system we're developing is stateless. So you won't need to know anything about anyone. All you just need to know is your local nodes that you have near you, right? So we're inheriting some of the qualities of the internet, some of the things that do work, and we're augmenting other ones like address resolution packets, right? I mean, we're going to do authenticated address resolution packets. Your file system is going to be authenticated, which means in order to modify my file system, it's going to require a blockchain entry, right? In order to change a file, it's going to require a blockchain entry so that files can't, not a virus can't be injected into your remote file system. That's one of the most effective ways that they can actually live uncovered, is just sniffing an open port, injecting itself into your disk. And computers don't know that because they don't know themselves. But when you have the blockchain that acts as your point of reference, your reference point, then it can know itself because it knows what its state was before the virus happened, right? And the same thing with the DNS, certificate authorities, right, where you have to go pay Symantec for this special SSL certificate. That's actually, well, we have that
funny.
working
It's so
now.
ridiculous, isn't it? Watching the old internet where they're like all handing the key over and they're really
here's your key.
People,
The key. Yeah, exactly.
It's like, what? Are we cavemen and women?
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's the old internet is, you know, kind of like, I consider it's a very, very valuable prototype. It's showing us all of the things in an interconnected network. But this Nexus is kind of taking that to the next step. So, you know, it is essentially a new internet architecture, but it's something that can also sit over the old internet, right? As it exists right now, it's still running over the old hardware. And eventually, I think probably in the next couple of years, we're going to be actually having the physical hardware deployed, right? Which it's kind of going down the stack. We're working, the internet's built on a 7-layer stack called the OSI. And I've just been slowly dialing down the base layers, obviously the physical layer, slowly dialing each one in, getting lower and lower and lower as I'm developing and fixing all of these things. So it's not necessarily like Made Safe, because Made Safe was more of like just a data hosting system.
Yeah, I mean, it was before even Bitcoin. I mean, they started so long ago, and I'm sure they made a lot of
They
mistakes.
were one of the first ICOs. I love David Irvine. Yeah, back when I did Tatiana Coin, they were right then. I remember.
Yeah, they were rolling for a while, but I mean, I think a lot of the issues with those types of systems is they had a game theory issue. They just couldn't incentivize people to host that data as effectively. I know Filecoin tried to solve that IPFS, but I believe that a lot of these people haven't found success in that because they're overthinking the situation. They're overthinking the architecture. And that's where, Yeah,
like what I have a problem with the whole coins to do file things is when you've got some Bitcoin and then you want to trade that for the thing and you're constantly having to use different coins. This is the major issue that I see moving forward. And I see things like what we're doing with negative trading fees to be really useful in the once decentralized exchanges come out, because I don't think a lot of these decentralized exchanges have enough liquidity to be able to jump in and out of coins like Nexus, to be able to do file transfers and all this stuff if they're getting paid in, I don't know, Uber coin because they do some Uber driving and they want to, you know, change some file Nexus.
I mean, to add to that point, I think that's a really terrible model that a lot of projects have taken on is, I'm going to make a coin and I'm going to make a platform, and then you have to pay for my platform with my coin, right?
Yeah.
It's just, I've seen 1,000,001 ideas like that, and it's just the economics just do not work that way. Yeah. You need less coins, not more coins. And if you do have a coin, you need it to have this very specific utility that's not just using it for one specific purpose, right? And the same thing with like the new internet infrastructures and stuff. They're missing the balance of all of these different faucets to really make it work, right? We need the hardware network. We need the satellites. We need the mesh networks. We need a verifiable operating system. we need the blockchain technology, right? And you need the gamification, and you need the localization file hosting, right? And the gamified file hosting that way. And then you need also a gamified routing system. Like I was saying earlier about ISPs just route for one another because it's just the kind of common thing. Hey, well, if they don't route for me, I won't route for them. And then the internet's going to break, right?
Yeah.
So it's this mutually assured destruction that's kind of the incentive right now. But if you guys have heard of multicast, it's a type of protocol where right now I'm kind of multicasting, right? I'm speaking one message and all of you guys are getting it at the same time. Where unicast would be like a person-to-person conversation, that's how the internet works, right? Multicast is a great technology, but it really hasn't been adopted on the internet because guess what? ISPs don't route multicast traffic for each other, right? Yeah, right? Because there's, oh yeah, well, you know, we have to do unicast because of multi-assured destruction, right? But multicast, oh no, we're not going to route that. So there's a massive incentive issue there. So that's why we're kind of combining together all these different faucets to create this new internet infrastructure and essentially a new ecosystem, right? That has
Colin,
the capability.
Sorry, amazing answers, by the way. Really, and a huge vision, right, Tatiana? I mean, this is I
A
love
little
these
bit
sort of,
out of my depth. I have some questions. I'm waiting in the wings. I think that you had one though, Josh. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just wondering. Like, I know a lot of people are going to say, "Well, satellites. How are you going to get satellites up at this point?" You know, this is the big issue that people were very surprised they could get that Blockstream could get a satellite up. But really, they're just hijacking. They're just jacking on top of a satellite company that's already up there.
They didn't deploy a satellite. They actually just leased the bandwidth from another satellite provider. So their implementation of it, they did it most is to try to slap in the face of Jeff Garzik because, you know, Blockstream, and we don't need to get into all that drama. But they essentially are just, it's another satellite-based ISP. It doesn't serve uplink verification. You actually have to uplink through their ground station, which means you have to route through the rest of the network, right? It's only a downlink, which is kind of, I don't know, it's a little bit pointless. It was more of a publicity stunt to me than actually something that's practical for people. And also another form of revenue. They can sell antennas, they can do all this stuff, and all you have to do is lease a satellite, right? We're actually working, instead of it being a big giant satellite that's really, really far away, which is how most satellites are, they're actually really teeny satellites that are really close. So if you notice, if you ever use satellite internet, it takes about 1 second for your signal to bounce off the satellite and come back because it's just 27,000 miles for geosynchronous orbit. It's a really, really long way. This, we can get it about 100 milliseconds because we're in low Earth orbit, which is about at least 100 miles. So we're probably going to be about 250 kilometer inclination. But the question, to answer the question, is how do you launch a satellite? You put it on a rocket, right? Anybody, and if you're saying, well, why you, Colin? How would you know, blah, blah, blah. Well, my father co-founded, he was on the founding team of SpaceX. And so he's very well versed in the aerospace industry, and he builds rockets. So that ended up becoming a cool thing where we started working together. He builds rockets, I build the satellites and software and stuff like that. And,
right on.
We're working on getting this deployed together, which is pretty cool. So we have you know, all the pieces that we need to make it work. And some of the more complex ones, such as frequency licensing and the routing system, have been more recently resolved actually through some very unique ways to think of things. So yeah, it's come a long way. And I mean, speaking about the satellites 3 years ago, a lot of it, the design anyway, was more proof of concepts and get the satellite up and start getting it orbitable and start working with UHF, VHF, which stands for ultra high frequency or very high frequency. It's just a type of frequency that you use for the radio communication. And that was, you know, the original implementation back then, also working with Galactic Sky. But since then, it's really evolved architecturally into something really beautiful. And it ties together really nicely with the operating system design, which essentially for anybody, if you want to go get a satellite, right? Hey, I want to put a satellite up. I want to have a part of this. Well, you'll be able to go buy a satellite kit and put it on the rocket. And I think it'll probably be about $200,000, maybe $250,000 to put up a satellite, including the cost, launch costs, and everything is about what you'll end up looking at. So, you know, you'll be able to do the ROI, put it on the sat, and then boom. And the cool thing about it is all you have to do is install Nexus OS on it and then put it in orbit. and it's going to find its peers, just kind of like a network right now. You turn on the node, it finds its peers. The network will do that too. And it also provides value for more than just a type of file hosting system, where it's a routing system. So if I'm somebody that, you know, wants to do satellite imaging, right, but I don't have enough money to put up an entire constellation, you know, but I want to have more constant communication with my satellite, you can just join Nexus. And, you know, the routing reputation system, you build the router into that satellite, right? You don't necessarily have to have all the file and all that stuff, but just the baseline routing system, because if you don't route for your neighbors, they're going to just start ignoring you, right? So if you want to take advantage of the Nexus routing system, you'll have to contribute to it, right? There's not going to be any leeching. It's designed to prevent leechers, right? Because everybody eats, everybody contributes, and that's part of what's going to make this exponentially proliferate, because you're able to combine together everybody's value. Let's see, Metcalfe's law is a good example of it, which states that the value of a telecommunication system is proportional to the square of the participants. Or in other words, people cooperating together exponentially create value. People competing against each other linearly create value, right? So this hopefully, you know, will, you know, create a totally new ecosystem that lots of different people will be able to get involved in. And one of the most important parts of it, I see though, is that it reawakens people's imagination, right? When people all of a sudden start looking up and looking to the stars for solutions to these problems, right? It makes the world look a little less dim. It awakens you. Oh my gosh, you know, there could be life out there. There's so much to explore. And that wonder, that infinite wonder that we all came into this planet with, you know, as children, gets reignited. And that's something that's even more powerful than the technology itself. A planet of people actually becoming inspired again, becoming happy again, opening their imagination, because public schools start just beating the imagination out of you when you're, you know, 5. As soon as you get in there, they start beating the imagination out of you. And by the time they're 7, I mean, they've lost their imagination. And I mean, Ernie's the one that really drilled that home for me. And, you know, I mean, that, you know, destroying the imagination, it really destroys the future. It's our imagination that everything comes from, all this technology. Yeah. So, you know, the satellites are really cool because they play many different roles, right? It's not just for one specific purpose. There's many, many purposes. And that's kind of just how we work. We do one thing to do 5 things rather than 5 things to do one thing. You know what I mean? It just, it's more efficient. It utilizes the material better. So the satellites, that's the most important part is, you know, it wakes people up, and it gives people the capability to own a piece of that space, right? Just like,
okay, so wait. Because we're getting off in the weeds here, guys, and we got more questions, and we gotta like, you know, we gotta trim this little sucker down. So we got the satellites.
Yep.
You just need 250K, no biggie. That's cool. I don't think that's for the average user.
You could crowdsource it. You could
crowdsource it, absolutely. But you know, I have some questions from some fans of the project, and one of the things that they told me to do was congratulate you on your security. And apparently you guys posted a security audit that was completely unredacted.
Yep.
It's a little bit bold. What went on there? Tell me about how you decided to do that. And did they find anything bad, or did you just put, you know, an A+ on the wall, and then
no, I mean, they found some different things, which was good. Yeah, and we posted it unredacted. Just, I mean, radical transparency. We have nothing to hide. It's open source. You know, I mean, nice. I'm not the type of person that's scared of security issues. I mean, I've certainly encountered a lot in my days, and so yeah, I mean, we have a very, I think part of it's confidence in our security model. We're not afraid of what we don't know, because every line of Bitcoin code that we still use has been gone through and debugged and is very, very thoroughly understood, right? A lot of other people that may be cloning stuff or just copying or adding little features or combining together features from 5 different coins to make one new coin or whatever, they probably aren't going to post anything like that because they're scared, because they don't know what they're doing, right? So a part of it comes from a confidence in what we're doing, and the other part comes from just setting the bar, changing the way hopefully people see these things. You know, just, you know, hey, this is what it is. Why are we going to hide it? You know, and if you fix it, why does it matter if you show somebody how to exploit it, right? I mean, it's, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and the
We
source
did
code's open anyway, so yeah.
amazing. Well, I remember seeing that with like, I think, what was it, Pivx or something, where they just jammed like the dash code and with some of the ZK snark stuff. And it was just a big mash. And then of course it all broke. They didn't know
Yeah,
how to fix
the Peterson commitments.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
wait, I
because they
have a
weren't
question.
checking the length. Yeah, yeah.
it,
Well,
unfortunately.
okay. So the Peterson commitments, that's one thing. I don't know anything about that. But what have you guys done to deal with scaling issues? Because a lot of
Yeah.
chains have these problems. So I feel like
Yeah,
that,
so
what's the
I'm
story there? How do you fix that?
okay. So think of a blockchain as like a road, right? You got cars on the road. Think of cars as transactions. So when you get a lot of cars on the road, you run out of space, so you get traffic jams, right? And you get backlogs, and that's kind of what happens to blockchains right now. What Nexus is developing, which we're 30% through finishing it, it's 3 updates: Tritium, Amine, and Obsidian. We finished Tritium. We're working on Tritium++, and I'll give you the scaling results of Tritium. Tritium is a form of art of, I guess, I don't want to say perfection, but it's like my form of just informational symphony. You know, the best we can get a single dimensional blockchain, right? The fastest we can get a single dimensional blockchain. For one, to show that they actually can scale if you do your homework and you look through, you know, I guess everything as tightly as we do. But the multidimensional chaining structure is kind of like adding more lanes to the highway, right? So that you can fit more cars on the road. So we're doing that to keep it on the ledger instead of it going off this exit ramp, right? And then going and chilling off in some place and, you know, who knows what's happening, and then getting back on the highway, which is how Lightning Network works. We're just adding more lanes to the highway, right? And making the highway wider so that more can fit in. And that comes, the reason we call the 3-dimensional chain or multi-dimensional chaining is a blockchain is chained in one direction, right? You're chaining the previous block, right, backwards. So you've got one chain link per block. What we're doing is we're chaining in multiple directions. So you chain this way, and then you chain this way. So if you think of all of your lanes that you have on the highway, we're actually chaining all of those lanes across as well as we're changing them forward, right? And then that is just one layer, right? So that would be the base layer. And then you have the second layer and the third layer, and then those are chained up. So you end up with this type of Rubik's Cube looking 3D chain, right? And what that allows you to do is have everything on chain, right? Which means that you can do microtransactions and everything like that very quickly without security vulnerabilities. You have sharding built into it so that everybody doesn't have to have same state, right? You don't have to sync with the whole blockchain and all that crap anymore. And we're doing that in a few different unique ways. And then also just diving into every little intricate detail of the code, right? I mean, Ethereum's written in Go. Yeah, Go is closer to C++ for speed, but it's still this garbage collection. And garbage collection is just when you allocate a little bit of memory. In C, you have to actually manually say, I want to deallocate this memory when you're done with it, right? With garbage collection, it's just like, oh, hey, this is done, you know, and it collects it. But that takes computing cycles to do that, right? So the language choice is really important, and then also going into every single detail. So Tritium, I've actually developed, I mean, a completely new database engine too on top of it, just to deal with some of the scaling problems, because every cryptocurrency right now is built on LevelDB, which is developed by Google. And LevelDB really starts breaking down pretty quickly. It's using log structured merge trees, which is just a fancy word for it doesn't matter. But it's just a database indexing, which makes it easier to write. It's faster for write intensive applications, but it's slower on the read. And then when you start getting millions and millions and millions of keys, this data set gets bigger and bigger. And then you have more data you have to sift through in order to find one of those records, right? Which could be a transaction or a block or a contract. So that database ended up being a huge bottleneck. So I've developed one, or I've been developing it for about 5 years now, 4 years. And it's been in production for about 3. And I've actually just got it more recently, the last couple months, to constant time, which what that means is, you know, as your data gets, you get more and more data, computers get slower, right? Your computer gets more files on it, it gets slower. You have more data in the blockchain, it takes longer to load, it takes longer to sync. I got this database to be the same speed no matter how much data is in it, right? Up to about 10 billion keys. So, you write millions and millions of transactions, and instead of having millions and millions more, think of it as like an Excel spreadsheet where you have all these rows and columns. And first it'll take the key and it'll map that key into a row. And then you check a bloom filter on the row to say, is it in this row? Okay, yes, it is. And then I check a secondary one to say, okay, what column is it in? And with one disk read with the index files, I can know exactly what row and column that is in, right? And then I read that data there, and then I read the data record. So about 3 disk seeks is all I need for about, up to 10 billion keys, depending on how you configure the database. So that's really, really important. Yeah, it's blown my mind, dude, writing it, because that constant time databases, there's no constant time databases like ever out there. Like there's maybe a couple that try to be constant time, but it's just constant time off the disk just doesn't work, right?
All right.
Okay,
So
guys, I gotta tell you something.
Dream.
We're going way off into the weeds. How does a normal person, just regular old Tatiana, and maybe other people that are listening to this that understand some of your stuff, what do they do in order to get involved?
Okay, I'll tell you. In order to get involved in Nexus,
like how to host a website, because the thing is,
how to host a website.
That's how the web started.
Yeah,
that's how the web started, right? The internet started by someone that, they were kind of techie, but maybe they weren't like hardcore engineers, but they sort of, they worked at university. They could put some code together and website, and then
you'll
connect
open up
hyperlink, and boom.
You'll open up your computer on Nexus OS, right? You'll log in, Tatiana, got it, boom. And then you'll open up a folder that's like my whatever files that you have hosted. You'll right click one of the folders and you'll say share. And you say, do I want to share it privately or do I want to show it publicly? Share it publicly. Do you want to put this under a TNS entry, which is town name system? Yes, no. Yes, I do. What do you want it to be named? Blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's going to cost you 5 Nexus. Okay, done. Click, done. Boom. Okay, here, go check out my file. I got it for you. It's my website. Boom.
Who's looking at it, though? Do you have to be like a weird... What if I have just one of my normie friends? They don't know about this Nexus thing. I mean, what do they just type in?
They'll have to...
how do they do it?
So, are you talking about bridging it with the old internet?
Yeah, I'm saying okay, I made a Nexus website. I want to tell my friend Claudia about it. Claudia doesn't know bupkis about Nexus. So how is she going to know to go and check it out? Why, you know what I'm saying? Like, how do you get people from the real regular internet to start looking for things there?
That is a problem I have not completely. I would be lying if I said I had that completely figured out. Right now, it's mainly just the architecturals, how to do all of that. The bridging between the old and the new, I haven't given it a whole lot of thought because we're just not there yet. There's a lot of prerequisites to get there. But I mean, one thing that you'll be able to do is you'll be able to take a block hash, a Nexus hash, put it in your web browser, and that'll become an IP address, right? So what we're going to end up doing is making all these objects have their own IP address, addressable on the old internet. So in the same sense, I think you could most likely just have the Tatiana whatever hash go in, and what it's going to be using is what's called locator identifier separation protocol. Just think about it as like the internet right now is anytime you change to a different Wi-Fi, you're going to get a new phone number, right? So nobody really knows what phone number to call you on. That's how the internet works. But, normally you have one phone number with cell phone networks and it never changes. So think about that with IP addresses. So you'll have the same phone number that will never change. Now that number can also become a web address, right? That you can put directly into it. So that way we can kind of bridge it without the need for any browser extensions or plugins or anything like that. You'll just be able to type in, it'll look a little bit different than a web address, but just think about putting a hash in your web browser and boom, here I am. Then you can have more effective things such as, integrating town name system. We're going to be talking with other browsers too, like Brave browser and stuff like that, to start integrating some of our root of trust stuff. So, I mean, your browser will also be something that helps link it, from the old.
Have you guys talked with them yet? I love the Brave team. They're
not yet.
Very nice
no,
to
it's
me. They're
something that, it's something I've been playing around with because we just got the root of trust working. So you don't need to pay a certificate authority anymore. Where, when you go to a website and it says, oh, this site's unsafe, self-signed certificate. Ooh, scary.
I just had that happen the other day, and we had just renewed it a few months before.
Yep. So we're going to be you can already do that with web services. And then we're creating on the old internet right now, before we get to the new internet, we're creating SafeNet services. So through Nexus, you'll be able to deploy a SafeNet service, which you'll be able to do just by downloading some of our open source framework, because Nexus is a framework. So the blockchain, think of it as a aspect of a larger framework, a larger developer framework, right? Like one thing you can do right now is I can send peer-to-peer encrypted messages that are fully authenticated from app to app through the Nexus API, right? Without necessarily needing to touch the blockchain, but it's the blockchain that gives us all this ability to authenticate. So the blockchain is one layer in this larger set of things, right? So SafeNet services, we're going to be doing Nexus.io as the first one. So, I mean, as that gets more matured, I think we'll definitely be developing a better onboarding process. And then obviously integrating with the new internet, you'll have to have an antenna, right? So my phone, I could go and I plug an antenna into it and boom, I can connect to it, right? Or you can create local Wi-Fi hotspots from your ground station. That's another way, you just boom, connect right in. And obviously your ground station can be connected and act as an old internet gateway, for lack of better words. So, you know, I could have my ground station connected to a satellite, but also connected to my Wi-Fi router or my Cox, whatever, right? And then I can act as a bridge for local people on the mesh network too, to connect through to the old internet. So you'll get both of these connections, and I'm anticipating ground stations probably taking on both of those. And then, you know, to deploy a web service or a DApp, I mean, right now Nexus is all completely API driven. So you can actually use this program called Bubble, which is like a Wix, but it's an API driven Wix. And we've actually created a plugin on Bubble that runs a Nexus API. So you can build a DApp, drag and drop now on Nexus, right? Wow. So that's cool. Making crypto really easy to use is one of our big high points, right? You don't have wallet.dats anymore with Nexus. You have SigChain. So you have a username and a password and a PIN number. And it's essentially a decentralized login system. So all you need is that username, password, and PIN, and you log into it from anywhere, right? So you never lose these wallet.dats anymore. You don't have to make backups. You don't have to worry about corrupted files. You don't have to get all these complex hardware devices. You save your recovery phrase, which allows you to recover your account if you lose your username, password, and PIN, and then your username, password, and PIN, and boom, you're there. The same thing's going to be for Nexus OS. All you should do is log into your computer, and everything should be there for you, right? You shouldn't have to set up all this stuff. You shouldn't have to click and fits and all that stuff. I mean, I'm a very technical person, and I still think that most of the technology we use today is too complex to use. And
part of that is too. I concur.
Yeah, it's technological deficiencies, though, you know, and people say technology doesn't matter, but it absolutely matters when the promise of something is not met due to technological deficiencies. Now, once you've reached that promise, right, like a blockchain that can scale, you know, you have a currency that's stable, so on and so forth, then you can start saying that tech doesn't matter so much. But until we get to that bar, right, tech is absolutely important, because people aren't going to go download MetaMask things. And I just had a friend ask me, he's like, oh my gosh, does MetaMask store your coins? Have you ever used it? I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, I just had $1 billion appear in my account, and then it disappeared, and I should have spent it. I'm like, bro, like it's a bug, man. But like, I mean, he literally thought for a minute he had gotten $1 billion off of MetaMask, right? I mean, it's just things like that happening. Really not like it is, you know, it's good we're not mainstream. No. And you know, that's why we're focusing on making it really easy. And the new internet, like I said, will be just as easy as sharing a folder on your computer. You know, that's the beauty of Nexus OS, is it's going to integrate everything in a nice, seamless location, right? So
when can we see that? What is the timeline for that kind of feature?
Nexus OS, probably a couple years.
Okay.
I'm developing a lot of it from scratch, so I'm working off of a really old Unix kernel. So yeah, it's originally the consumer version of it's going to be a little bit further out than the IoT satellite version, but we're probably going to start seeing some testing done 2021. And that's when we're going to start seeing a lot more movement with the satellites and everything. Right now, it's just kind of prerequisites and designs and architecture and stuff like that. But I've started developing it. So yeah, I'd say at least probably a couple years before we get to consumer grade. But we'll be.
Who do you need? Like, who do you need?
Yeah, I mean,
to join? What sort of skill sets are you looking for people out there to join the project?
I I guess first and foremost is being aligned with the correct intentions. Like we don't want Lambo boys, you know, like
Right
I mean,
on.
if you're here for money, if you're here for money and moons and stuff, like, I mean, don't get me wrong, money's necessary, right? It's a necessary tool, but if it's your primary motivation, then generally you create all these other psychological conflicts that just make you more difficult to deal with, and I just don't want it, right? So I mean, just if you see the vision, like we're here to help. Like we're here to take this technology and help. Like we genuinely care about making the world a better place, right? We want to see the world a better place, and you do that through realigning the game theory. You know, a little bit of a tangent, but you know, I think the biggest problem with the world is bad game theory, right? People are naturally trusting and loving, but yet the game theory supports psychopaths and sociopaths, right? Because if you have empathy, you don't make it very far, because you give everything away and then everybody steals it from you, right? So when you realign that game theory, it makes people become more naturally who they are, closer to their true nature, right? So, you know, people that we work with, I mean, we're here kind of on a higher path in a way. Like we're doing it for a higher purpose than just making money. We're doing it to set a foundation for the future, the next, God knows how many centuries, you know, it could last. But I mean, that's the design. Is it's a technology that will be able to take us and drive us forward into, I guess, a new way of doing and seeing things.
Yeah, and that I mean, that's the same vibe that the original Bitcoiners, people that were in Bitcoin back in the day, had. They didn't Moon and Lambos, they didn't exist. I mean, Moon was kind of like a fun thing every so often, but really it was about changing society. It was about changing the markets. It was about defunding the state. It was about taking control back of the money. It was about, hey, screw auditing the Fed, just screw it. We're building our own system. Let's go.
Exactly.
And you know, it's really great to see other projects taking that ethos and that vibe and really going with it. You know, having, you know, when money comes, it comes as a bonus afterwards because you've built something epic.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah, and
well,
we're continuing kind of in Satoshi's footsteps in that way. You know, I mean, just a small little brief thing. You know, I learned from Satoshi. I read the source code back in 2013, 2014. Spent years in it, learning how to think like he thought, so that I could project forward. Well, if Satoshi was actually around to finish Bitcoin, what would it look like, right? If it was beyond a prototype, what would it look like? And that's Nexus, right? But the principle is the ethos and the technology as well.
Cool.
Well, awesome, guys. I like this unity here. I think there's a lot of similar goals. I hope I get to learn more about this and do a cello jam with you, Colin. We'll leave all the links for everybody to connect. And I don't know, any final words before we sign off at the Tatiana Show, guys?
I think this was good. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think if you want to stay in touch with me, I am at Voltoro on Twitter. That's the company, and at jshigala on Twitter. But that's about it.
Yeah. All right, rock and roll, everybody. Thanks so much for watching the show, and we'll see you next time.
What's the point of all this technology without a little love in our lives? Our hosts, Tatiana Moroz, Dr. Stephanie Murphy, and Lauren Kasovitz, have come together to bring you Proof of Love. Go to proofoflovecast.com. The Tatiana Show has been brought to you by CryptoMediaHub.com, a boutique marketing and PR agency for Bitcoin and beyond. Hey there, it's time for the show, the Tatiana Show, where you make friends and talk life and crypto. We gotta think and reflect and use lots of intellect with our hearts when we work together. I know that it can be so hard out there, looking all around and saying that life ain't fair. So that is why we will fight and stay up late at night, listening to the Tatiana Show. Thank you for listening to The Tatiana Show. Please follow us on Twitter at Queen Tatiana or on Facebook and Instagram at Tatiana Moroz Music. More episodes can be found at thetatianashow.com, and make sure you leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends. You are listening to The Tatiana Show. This show may contain adult content, language, and humor and is intended for mature audiences. If that's not you, please stop listening. Nothing you hear on The Tatiana Show is intended as financial advice, legal advice, or really anything other than entertainment. Take everything you hear with a grain of salt. Oh, and if you're listening to us on an affiliate network, the ideas and views expressed on this show are not necessarily those of the network that you're listening on or of any sponsors or any affiliate products you may hear about on this show.